Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast. I have a great interview with Mike Moffett at the end, a guy who's contributed a lot to the retro gaming scene, and then all the normal news as usual, so let's get started. To follow up with a bit of news from last week, Ben Heck finished part 2 of his teardown of the Nintendo PlayStation. After doing a cap replacement, he was able to get it mostly working, but there's still no games found for it yet. So it's if you're into it, I would definitely check out the video. It's long, but it was pretty interesting, and I certainly enjoyed it, so I'll post the link right in the description. The same person who created an optical drive emulator for the Dreamcast and Saturn just announced that they're making good progress on one for the PC Engine CD. So for anybody that doesn't know what an optical drive emulator is, it's pretty much what it sounds like. You unplug the CD-ROM drive from your console, and you plug this in its place, and then you play the games off of flash memory via a menu instead of CDs. So things like this are really important for preserving these older consoles, because CD-ROM replacement parts are getting harder to find. And it's one thing if you leave your consoles in storage and you don't play them in, like a museum style where you just want to keep them forever. But if you actually enjoy playing them, you're eventually going to wear out that drive, and that's probably going to be one of the first things to go on these consoles. So having stuff like this is very important to be able to preserve and actually play these old consoles properly. I'll post a link when there's any kind of pre-order or anything like that, but no news now other than he's working on it and making good progress. And hopefully they'll be more readily available than the other ones that he's sold, because historically it's been kind of hard to get them. So hopefully he'll go through a different pre-order process, maybe like what Jason from GameTech and Super G is doing with their products. But I'll keep everybody updated as soon as I hear anything. The company Wisdom Tree has just launched a Kickstarter campaign for a plug-and-play device that has all of their unlicensed Nintendo games on it. So anybody that's ever seen the Angry Video Game Nerd videos has probably seen this one. And they're basically just a bunch of terrible games, and the company didn't want to go through Nintendo's licensing, so they had these games that you'd have to plug into another one, or they're basically just shady ways to get around the copy protection and the lockout chip. And they're just notoriously terrible. But somehow their Kickstarter has almost been backed. I guess they asked for 16,000 and it's already at 10,000 now at the time I'm recording this video. I can't understand why anybody would back this. The games were so terrible. And it's also one of those things where this is where I love emulation, because go fire up an emulator and try one of these pieces of garbage and just see for yourself. That I don't understand who would want to back this, and I'm really sorry if you guys disagree, but take a look at the video for yourself and see what you think, but I will definitely not be supporting this one. Amazon UK may have accidentally leaked the release date and price of the PlayStation Neo. So the release date's supposedly October 13th at around $450, and that's the PlayStation console that's just the slight spec bump with the 4K video playback. So not 4K gaming support as far as I know, just the 4Play disc support. Any more info that comes out, any solid info, I'll post in case anybody wants to pre-order or anything. I don't own a PS4 yet, but I might actually buy this one just because it has the new 4K support for the discs, and just because there's a bunch of PlayStation 4 games I've really wanted to try and haven't gotten around to it yet. So I'll post as soon as there's any news, but I'm sure this is one of those things where it'll be all over the place as soon as it's announced. Here's a piece of news I missed from a few weeks ago. A Game Boy emulator for the Virtual Boy has just been updated. That's right, a Game Boy emulator for the Virtual Boy. So it's actually really cool. I tried it when it first came out, and there's been a few updates since, and the last one was just a few weeks ago. But basically you take the only existing Virtual Boy ROM cart, and you could use this emulator and drop a Game Boy ROM in it, and then just play it right on your Virtual Boy in stereoscopic 3D. So the fact that it's only one color is kind of fitting, because so are the original Game Boy games, and it actually works really well, all things considered. The 3D depth looks great, the games are playable, some are a little slower than others, but if you own a Virtual Boy and the Flash Boy ROM cart, you kind of have to try this one, because it's just so much fun to play through them. And I never made it through all the way through any of the games, but I will eventually, and if you're a Virtual Boy fan, you definitely got to try this one out. RetroUSB.com has just released a USB flash drive shaped like a Nintendo cartridge. They call it Super Media Brothers, and it looks like a mini Super Mario Brothers Nintendo cartridge. It looks really cool, and I would totally buy one, but it's only 4 gigabytes. So I really wish they made one larger, because I like to use 64 gig or bigger just for all the crap I have to carry around with me. But hopefully they'll come up with different sizes. It is only $20, but I would have gladly paid double for something a lot bigger in storage. But definitely check it out. It looks pretty neat. It looks like something anybody who needs a small USB stick and likes retro gaming would probably want to have. Arcade gamer Billy Mitchell has just reached the highest possible score on the original Pac-Man arcade game. Billy Mitchell was the guy that was featured in the documentary The King of Kong, which I absolutely loved it. I'm not a big Donkey Kong fan, but anybody that loves arcade games really probably would be interested in it. And it's a cool story about two guys who just both are gunning for the highest score. Well, he also now, I guess, is working on Pac-Man, and he's got a pretty cool interview on YouTube, which I'll link to and everything, but it's neat that some of these old arcade games really still get such a big amount of attention, so definitely check it out. And speaking of Pac-Man, Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 is being released this September for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. It actually looks really awesome. Like, I haven't gotten this excited about Pac-Man since I remember seeing the originals in the arcade. But it adds new features, but at the same time, it sticks to the same core gameplay. It's not like that 3D Pac-Man thing they had going a couple of years ago. It's, original Pac-Man on steroids. So if you're a fan of the game, check it out, definitely. The website Thinkgeek released another cool little toy this week. It's called the Retro Arcade Machine X, and it's a miniature arcade machine with 300 games built into it. It doesn't list the games, I'm sure most of them aren't that good, but it's a 2.5-inch color display and then just a little tiny stick with two buttons. And it looks actually pretty neat. For $25, it seems like something fun and novel you might play a handful of times. But what I would really like is for somebody to build a personal bar top style arcade machine that's kind of medium sized. So I had a stand-up Mortal Kombat arcade machine that was 24 inches, 24-inch monitor. That was freaking awesome. I loved it. I think that's the perfect size too for an arcade monitor. A lot of the older stand-up arcades have 20-inch or even smaller, which for a stand-up arcade that's okay, but it's a little too big for something to sit down right in front of. At least in my opinion. And then you have the 8-inch BVMs, like the one I have up behind me, which I use that for testing all the time, but it's just a little bit too small to actually play games on. So I always wanted like a 14-inch BVM to be in an arcade-style box that just fits on a table right in front of you. So you could sit in front of it, bar top style, and have like an X-Arcade Solo, which is the arcade stick that's just one player, not two. Then you'd be able to actually have an arcade experience with a great CRT, because those BVMs are way better quality than any arcade monitor ever was. And you could just have it right there on your desk. But I don't know anybody that can build something that high quality, and I don't know any of the companies that already sell stand-up arcades that do. There was that company a few weeks ago that wanted a couple $100,000 to push through their stand-up arcades on Kickstarter, but that just seemed like a scam. It also seemed like they were selling the 8-bit Do classic controllers for $100 and marketing them as their own. So, and it's kind of hard to find. I wish there was just a good, reputable arcade machine company you could buy stuff like this from. And, I'd be willing to pay a fair amount for it. I'm not going to pay $2,000 for it. I could probably build a half-assed job myself for a few hundred. But if it was fairly priced, I really think a lot of people would be interested in it. So, I guess I kind of went off on a rant there, but if you want the little miniature 2.5-inch version, go spend $25 at Thinkgeek. And if you want a bigger, more professional CRT-based version, let me know where we could find one of these, because I really don't know a good, reliable place for it. Nintendo released a playable demo for Star Fox Zero this week, and it comes a few months after the game was released, but I guess it's been getting mixed reviews. Some people have told me, don't play it, the motion controls are awful, some people like them. I haven't tried it myself yet, but I plan on downloading the free demo just to kind of see what it's like. But I really think they should have done this first, and they probably should have done it months before the game was launched, just so they can get through any of the bugs, because as many testers as you have, you're never going to be able to get real feedback until it gets to the hands of the consumer. So it's good that they released the demo at all. I just wish that they had released it way beforehand so they can get better feedback and kind of see what people really wanted the game to be. And to follow up on last week's news about the NES Mini, Nintendo has released a commercial on it, and as well as showed it at Comic-Con, where people were able to take a look at it and kind of hold it in their hands and check it out. But no one, as far as I know, has posted any info on the functionality, the features. None of them showed any scan lines or anything like that. So there's no word on its actual functionality other than the fact that it looks pretty cool, and it's pretty much the same as all the news that we knew last week, but I'll post all the links to everything for anybody that's interested themselves if they want to take a look at it. So I guess Sega's been seeing all the nostalgia and the callbacks to classic game consoles get popular again because they just announced Sonic Mania, a new 2D Sonic game is going to be released in 2017. And to be honest, it looks really cool. It looks like it's going to be like the next iteration of the Sonic games. I remember Sonic 4 Episode 1 came out, and I absolutely loved it. And then for whatever reason, Episode 2 came out, and it wasn't bad, it just didn't feel the same. I can't really describe it. If you guys, anybody's played it, could maybe put it in better perspective in the comments, that would be great. But hopefully this will be a big win. Hopefully they'll be able to really take it back and make it a true 2D side-scrolling Sonic game that feels just as good as the originals, because there were a lot of good Sonic games. I think Sonic 3 and Sonic CD were my favorites, but there's a ton of good ones. Even the ones on the handheld consoles were great too. So hopefully this will be at least half as good as those and better than what's been coming out lately. And to close out the news, I finally am finishing up the Upscaler review page. So that's basically what I've been talking about on the podcast a bunch of times, but as a page on the website. So just comparing the different Upscaler options, the OSSC versus the FrameMeister and all that stuff. So I'll leave a link to it. You guys let me know what you think, and please point out if I made any mistakes or anything, because I've been working on this so long and put so much time into it that it's kind of like if you drive down the same street every day but don't know the name of the street, you just know how to get there. I get like that a lot with some of these pages where I spend so much time on the little details that I forget some of the basic stuff. So people will read it and come back and be like, oh, that was great, but where's the on button, or something simple like that. So if you guys were interested in the different Upscaler comparisons, maybe check out the page and just let me know what you think. Okay, on to the Q&A stuff. I'm going to start with my friend Justin, aka the Goodwill Hunter, who was commenting on last week's video about some of the arcade systems, and he was talking about the submarine one that I was playing. Justin said, Bob, submarines do not have portholes and don't shoot missiles. They have a periscope and shoot torpedoes. So I feel like a raging idiot right now because my father was in the submarines, and his father, my grandfather, was chief petty officer in the submarines. I grew up knowing every submarine movie, every submarine video game, all the way back to Gato for the Tandy 1000. I know that. I was just excited and just talking about something I enjoyed and totally didn't even realize I said the wrong things. So anybody in the Navy and anybody in the submarines that might be listening to this, I'm really sorry. That was such a stupid mistake. And yeah, I know it's not a porthole or a missile. So sorry, I was really dumb. Justin was in the Marines, so he likes to point out these stupid things that I do sometimes. And he also had a gaming question. He asked if I'd seen anything about modding Sega Game Gear for AV Out. So, yeah, there's actually three things. There's the Tim Worthington mod, which is just, I believe it's RGB and S-Video and Composite. I've only modded mine for RGB with his kit. I can't remember if it can do the other ones, but I'll definitely double check. And then there's also the McWill kit, which supports VGA and RGB, as well as has that awesome upgraded screen. But then there's one more that's been talked about and probably still a year away, but that's actually a digital-to-digital HDMI mod for the Game Gear, which has the potential to be pretty amazing. So there's no official word on that yet, other than somebody's working on it. But I'll update and talk about it as soon as there's any real info on it. And I really hope it actually makes it to a real product, because that's something I would definitely buy. My friend Phil also had a comment about the arcade exhibit thing that I was talking about. He said, hadn't you ever been to an arcade before? Is that why you were so impressed? I forgot you were younger than me. Screw you, Phil. We're the same age. We both grew up going to arcades. The whole reason I was so impressed wasn't because I'd never seen him before. It's because when we were growing up, it was just the way it is. You don't realize that each one of those games is so unique and special. They're just the games in the arcade. I guess maybe I didn't make the point as well as I should have, but the whole reason I was so excited and impressed about those was because after playing the console versions of them, and only the console versions, for the last 10, 15, 20 years, to go back and see the way they were originally designed and how you originally played them was pretty impressive. Because games with like vector graphics, you could never actually recreate that experience unless you were using a vector monitor. So for all the people nowadays and all the younger kids, in their early 20s, especially, or even younger, who maybe might get into some of the retro style games, might not have any idea how good they actually are in these original environments. So I hope that makes the point a little bit clearer, but it wasn't that I'd never seen them before, it was just that I'd forgotten how unique and different each of the experiences were. So anybody that's in the New York area should probably go check out that arcade. And I'm sure there's other things like that around the country and even around the world, but in the US, especially around California and in Brooklyn, we have things called barcades. So it's a bar with a little arcade in it, but this is not the same. It's a bunch of hipsters that just think, oh, let's play old things because I want to play old things, and it totally misses the point. They don't have any of the special stand-up arcades, at least the ones I've been to. They just have the basics, like, okay, here's Pac-Man and here's Donkey Kong, and here's the 5 games I could play on an emulator, and it'll be identical. What I'm actually talking about, which was shown a lot in this arcade exhibit, are the ones that are completely different. So, and actually, if anybody knows other arcades like that, where you could actually go and play some of the rare ones, please post that in the comments as well. I'd love to see it. I've actually always wanted to see a Space Harrier 3D arcade setup. I've only played it on the home consoles. I've never actually seen an original Space Harrier 3D arcade machine, and I don't even know if it made it to the US. It might have been Japan only, but yeah, post in the comments if you guys know any good arcades that people could go to. Next up, Flynn's posted a comment in regards to the power switch question of how I would kind of pull the plug for the power strips for all my consoles, and he recommends RF remote modules for outlets for shutting off your power strips, so that way you could actually just have one remote, you press the button and it kills the power. Those are great. The only thing is, if you're extra paranoid like me, those won't stop things like lightning strikes or anything like that. So but if you have good grounding in your house anyway, you probably wouldn't have to worry about it as much. But that's a great tip. Thanks for pointing that out. YouTube user Akutsu260 posted in regards to the discussion last week about Dreamcast and if there's a good quality cable or not. And he posted a link to a VGA cable that's under $10, including shipping, that he says is great quality and he had no problems with. So I'm still going to use the Behar Brothers boxes that I bought just because I absolutely love the way they work. But if you just want to try a cheap VGA cable, maybe this is a good thing. Because, for $10, it's not the end of the world if it turns out to be just okay quality. Maybe now you'll end up with a spare, or maybe you get this to hold you off until you could afford one of the bigger boxes. So, but thank you very much for the link, and it'll be in the description for anybody listening. Joseph Garahan posted a question in regards to the NES Mini. I read through your question a couple times, and I don't think you understood the ports, so maybe let me clarify it for you, and hopefully this will all make sense now. So the ports in the front of the NES Mini are the exact same ports you'd find at the bottom of a Wiimote. So a classic controller will work, these new Nintendo-style controllers will work, and they should also work in any bottom of a Wiimote as well. But you were talking about adding Bluetooth and using the 8-bit 2 wireless adapter, but that's not really going to work with this at all. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding your question, so maybe just reword it and post it this week. I actually tried responding to you directly on YouTube, but for some reason, sometimes YouTube doesn't let me respond to comments. So I'll respond to 3 in a row, and they'll all be fine, and then I'll hit send on number 4, and it just says unable to post response. So if anybody is a YouTube expert or something and knows why that happens, I really have no clue, but sorry, I would have responded to you right there. But yeah, please let me know if I answered your question correctly or if I just misunderstood what you meant. YouTube user 01Phoenix79 asked that when I post the links in the description, I add a quick little blurb of what each link is, so that way you don't have to click on the link to find out what it is that you're clicking on. Great suggestion. I did it for last week's. I'll do it for the rest of them as well. And this is the type of stuff where I just love the feedback because, in my mind, I know what all the links are because I'm the one that posted them. So it's kind of ridiculous that I never thought to do that first. But any comments and feedback you guys have, I always really appreciate. So thanks for bringing that up. And anything else you guys got, let me know, and I'll make those changes as well. Eric Hurley asked a good question, and something that I've discussed before with other people, but I can't remember if I ever talked about it on the podcast. He said, do you think ROM carts can be a bad thing in terms of collecting and playing physical games? Does that unlimited choice at your fingertips take away from the physical game experience? I'm wondering if I should buy one, but I'm afraid it will make me not want to keep building a physical collection and somehow devalue the playableness of a game. I fear it will have the same effect of having an iPod full of thousands of songs and just flicking through them versus putting on a vinyl album and listening to it the whole way through. Just downloaded Smoke Monster's EverDrive ROM packs, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a few. Well, they're all great points, and I'll give a very quick description for each because I could easily ramble on each of those. I love ROM carts for a million reasons that I've already mentioned a million times, but basically, having everything in one place I find convenient, and I find it also better to have something so you don't have to keep taking your expensive games off the shelf and using them. You could just use it right on the ROM cart. But I also have an iPod filled with a million songs, and depending on my mood, I might leave it on random, or I might sit and listen to an album start to finish. And I feel like it's the same way with video games. You know, sometimes you just want to play Tetris for 10 minutes, so flick on your ROM cart, choose your version of Tetris, and that's it. But that never, for me, I never will put on Zelda and get halfway through and switch to another game. If I want to play through a game, you know, having all those other choices isn't going to take away from it for me. But the one point that you did make that was a big deal for me as a kid was if you bought a game and you opened it, you couldn't return it to the store, at least where I lived. And even if you rented a game, that's it. You were stuck with it. If you rented a game and it stunk and you brought it back the same day, you had to pay the same $8 or whatever it was as if you kept it over the weekend. And that is what made a huge difference for me as a kid. Because I'd get a game based on the box art and the description, and I'd get excited and I'd take it home. And a lot of times it just really sucked and it just ruined my weekend because it was raining out and couldn't go out and play, but I had this terrible game. But other times, it kind of forced me to be patient with a game that I normally would not have taken the time to learn. So there were a lot of games where maybe the first couple of levels, you were just kind of getting used to it, and the controls were a little different. And then by the time you get to the third or fourth level, it's like, holy crap, this game is amazing. I'm so glad I stuck with it. And owning a ROM cart, there's been a few times people have said, oh, you got to play this game. I'll play it for 5 seconds and go, it sucks. And I'll go right back to a different game. So that is the one big difference in my opinion, is if you're buying games one at a time and trying them, you tend to give them a lot more time and a lot more of a chance to like it. Whereas with the ROM card, it's very easy just to say, I don't like this one, I'm just going to move on. But the one point that was very important to me, especially when I made the ROM cart page on my site, was that will ROM carts take away from collectors? And that's the thing that both people that own game stores, my collector friends, they all said absolutely not. You know, maybe the guy that was about to buy NES Golf for $3 won't buy that now because he has a ROM cart. Fine. But the people that want a complete in-box set, they want something to hold on their wall, they want something to really just, you know, they want to collect it to be a collector, it's not going to make the slightest bit of a difference. The only thing that I would like to see is some of these ridiculously expensive games come down in price. But even, you know, even if they don't, as long as you're able to play them on the ROM cart, it's fine. But yeah, I mean, I would never not own one now, and especially for the try before you buy. The game Chiller for Nintendo was selling for like $100, and it's an unlicensed game, and it was, you know, got all this crazy reputation. And when I finally played it, I mean, it was neat. Played it for about 10 minutes, and I was so glad I didn't waste $100 on it. So, I hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope that was the perspective you were looking for. So, good questions though. Next up, Jonathan Tuttle asked, the SD Media Launcher for GameCube suddenly got very hard to come by. Do you know if any of the GameCube regular Action Replay discs will be able to load up info from a memory card modded SD card? So I was really curious about this myself, because I know all Action Replays have different versions to them. So I bought just a loose Action Replay disc from a game store a couple weeks ago. Didn't come with the SD launcher, it was just a basic Action Replay disc. And then I got a cheap SD reader, GameCube Memory SD reader from Hong Kong right on eBay. And they both worked exactly like the kit did together. So I'm sure there's got to be different versions of the Action Replay. I'm just not sure if only some versions are compatible. And they don't print the versions on the outside. So I got lucky, and I'm pretty sure it's worth trying if you guys have the ability. But I'll post the link for the cheap SD card reader that I got for GameCube, and give it a try and let me know. Especially if you already have an Action Replay disc laying around. But it worked for me, so hopefully it'll work for everybody else. Okay, next up I have a pretty cool interview with Mike Moffett, who's Michael J. Moffett on the forums. His webpage was one of the first that featured any real RGB info, so I've been following his work for a really long time, and it's cool that I actually got to talk to him. And the first time I even corresponded with him at all was just right before this interview. I just emailed him and said, hey, I just did an interview with Retro Dan, who brought up your name. Would you want to do an interview with me? And he responded right away, like, yeah, sure, cool, let's do it. So it's neat. It's always nice to see how many friendly people are in the retro gaming community that just enjoy this stuff as much as I do. And as you'd expect, we nerded out for a little while and just talked about everything that hopefully you guys are interested in. So hope you enjoy it, and if you like it, please subscribe, and see you next week. Hey guys, we're here with Michael Moffett. How's it going, Mike? It's nice to finally meet you and talk to you. I've been going on your website for quite a while.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm doing well out here in sunny California right now.
Yeah, so weren't you a New Yorker?
Yes, and I actually am legally still a New Yorker. I'm still in school at RIT, and I'm about to finish up, but I'm working doing a co-op internship out here in California at Nest Labs.
Oh, cool.
So every summer I've usually been somewhere other than New York. I'd like to work in New York, but the kind of work I like to do usually isn't there, so...
Yeah, I hear you. My brother moved to LA for that exact reason. He's a producer, so can't really be a producer in New York.
Yeah, it's totally big here, too.
So it's cool to have you on, because I'm pretty sure everybody listening is seeing your name come up once or twice here. You're Michael J. Moffett on the forums and everything, and that's your website. And you were, when I first started getting into RGB again, because, I'd heard of RGB in the 90s when I was a kid, but no kid could afford any of that stuff, so I just forgot about it till a few years ago. But your site was one of the first ones that came up, because you started messing with things like component video conversion, and you were even one of the first that I saw online to start modifying TVs for RGB SCART input.
I remember the Super NES thing. I posted the information I found in the first one, which was maybe a little misguided. I didn't expect people to follow that like a guide. Definitely you can't just hook it up. There's a little bit of a passive circuitry it's supposed to introduce, and maybe that got the ball rolling. I don't know, but that's actually seen a lot more traffic than I expected. So.
Yeah, I think the only original sites that had any info on RGB was yours and Chris Covell, and maybe one or two.
I read his website a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and other than that, it was just forums, and half the stuff I found on forums wasn't even right. So.
Yeah, well, that's what's tough about it, right? Because a lot of this stuff, it's not like there's a lot of professional documentation talking about RGB analog video as a standard. Because really, say standard is pushing it. RGB that's the color space, and that's also the component signal separation, but things like drive strength, termination, peak-to-peak voltage. These are all going to vary in different implementations. I guess the closest is probably what arcades have, and arcades are kind of Wild West. They don't really care if it's too high voltage. You turn the tube down, So.
Yeah, and when I first started building my arcade machine, I didn't realize how many used different resolutions, different refresh rates. It was way off standard for anything because they could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the info I saw was Chris Covell's website. I was in middle school, and this is weird. 10 years ago, I would just read NESDev all day. When you're in middle school, you like computers, you go online, you don't have friends, so you read NESDev, and from there I'd see his stuff, and it never occurred to me until that point that stuff can look better. I was playing on this 1970s TV that my parents had in college to play NES, and that's fine, but I definitely noticed the artifacts, so it's cool to see that example. And the PS1 LCDs were a really popular modding choice because they can take RGB.
Right.
That's why it looks really good with the PlayStation.
So that's how you got started? You were just kind of hitting up the forums as a kid and started messing with the stuff?
Yeah, I was a member of Hex forums a long time ago, and then member Palmer Luckey, actually Oculus Palmer Luckey, broke off his own forum called Mod Retro, which is still going, and that was a big part of high school too. He and I actually collaborate a lot on the Game Boy backlight stuff back before there were kits on that. So we worked together on the Game Boy Pocket stuff there. So I guess video stuff's always been kind of neat.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, the backlights for the biverted backlight for the Game Boy Pocket and original Game Boy,
Oh God,
it's like a whole other system. It's
I
like
did.
the
Yeah,
experience.
that is a term I did not mean to coin. It's a little bit of a silly term, but yeah, I was let's see, Nitro 2K01 introduced me to the idea of using digital logic, and of course that makes sense. But I put two together to invert the screen, but I knew that like the inverted screens looked higher contrast data is wrong, so.
Yeah, actually, for
I
anybody
guess
that doesn't know what that is, maybe could you explain a little bit about the biverted
sure.
mod for both of them?
Yeah, so back when people were doing the DMG backlights, sometimes people would offer an option to invert the screen for better contrast. And that's true. It does get better contrast. And for Little Sound DJ, which was the main audience here, you'd get the light text on a dark background. And that's actually maybe preferable. I prefer that when I use it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to play a game or something, the game's inverted. So I thought like, well, okay, when I turn this polarizer on the screen, the colors get inverted. And there's actually some interesting spots between the full 90-degree rotation. The ideal rotation is really like 120. You have to like cut a panel out of that. Whatever, it's weird. But it occurred to me like, well, if we invert data going to the screen, we can do a double inversion, and biversion was the term that a 10th grade high school kid comes up with. So that's what I called it. And then Nitro 2K01, I mentioned this to him, and he made a little write-up on using a inverter to do that. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty cool, and then I made a guide for cutting up the Game Boy board to do that. So, the only downside to it is that the backlight is really great in the dark, but the reflectivity of the screen is mostly lost in the daylight. So it kind of becomes an indoors-only thing.
But I feel like that's the same thing with many different handhelds, including cell phones. You know, my iPhone's got a gorgeous screen, but if it's a bright, sunny day and I'm sitting outside, I can't read it anyway.
It gets rough, yeah. Like I'm working on a new laptop right here, and it's crappy outside. So,
yeah.
I thought it was worth it, definitely.
So that was one of your first. Was that one of your first mod projects, the biverted light?
That was my first publicized. Yeah, the first one that I was responsible for, definitely. The first mod thing I ever did was just following a guide or something, was the Afterburner kit for Game Boy Advance in 5th grade.
That was the one that did the front light into a Game Boy Advance, right?
Yes, and that was before the SP came out, so that was pretty great.
I remember doing that myself. It came out really shitty.
I still have that driving screwdriver. That's the only one I have, so I'm glad I guess it was good.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of those front light mods. I had one. I did one to the I think to Game Boy Color, and it came out all right. And then I had mine sent. I'm sorry, what?
Did you tilt the front light sideways or horizontal?
I can't remember because it was so long ago. I ended up having another one done from a professional modding service. I'm sure it's just a dude like me that does it out of his place, but. And it was exactly the same, which made me feel good that I didn't screw it up, but it's still not what I had hoped for. Same thing with the Neo Geo Pocket Color.
Yep. So fun story with those. Back around the same high school time, it occurred to me to take the Game Boy Advance SP part and use an X-Acto knife and cut down the panel to fit the Game Boy Color screen, make it a square, and that works as well as the Game Boy Advance SP1, which is okay. And I realized it's easier to just rotate the panel, mount it in sideways, and cut away some of the plastic, so you don't actually have to cut the panel at all. Upside is that you don't get your fingerprints on the panel. The downside is that the viewing angles for the backlight kind of become more horizontally biased. And that's this kind of washed out look. Mm-hmm. So around that time, I remember Nonfinite's shop was doing pretty well with the backlights and stuff. So I believe he talked to a factory talking about trying to get new front light parts made. Which would be really cool. But I think the samples came in and they weren't very good. I don't remember the exact story here, but the ones you find on eBay, the kits and stuff, and then all the mods you can buy now on eBay are using those panels. That factory appears to have kept making them, even though they're terrible. So they're super washed out. You can barely see the image. The saturation becomes really poor. So I won't recommend to anybody to buy a front light Game Boy Color unless they know it's been harvested from an SP. Which is kind of bad in its own way. So it's I don't think
it's funny. I did so much work in Asia for my last company, right? And it just it's, China gets a bad rap, but don't forget, there's a billion people, so there's more of everything, more assholes,
Sure,
more nice people.
absolutely, yeah. Like
And it's
there's a lot
just
of amazing stuff that comes out of China, and then there's a lot more. There's a lot of cheaper stuff too. Like it's very opportunistic, and
and that's the
I think
exact
there's a
scenario that happens so often, though. So you have an idea, you run it through them, and go, all right, this has a potential for a couple thousand sales, and you get the prototype back, and you go, this is a terrible idea, never mind. And then 6 months, you see it for sale on Alibaba nowadays. Back in the day, you'd have to find it through the little shops, and it's like, even though it was a terrible idea, they took your idea and made it anyway. It's like,
yeah, right.
hell?
So I guess if it was going to be nothing, yes, more power to them. But at the same time, it's just kind of like this is kind of a free market thing. If you're informed about it, you'll know better not to buy a front like it. So whatever, they can do what they want to do. I guess I would not recommend any of them to anybody.
Yeah, me neither. And there's really no other option at all for Game Boy Color or for
Game Boy Color is screwed. You gotta either play on an SP, have it stick out, and that's okay if the buttons are. I'm not a huge fan. Or play on the Game Boy Advance with it sticking out the top and have an afterburner. Game Boy Color's in a tough spot. It's a type of LCD that cannot be backlit. Same as we worked on the backlights. Palmer and I have talked a lot about the Game Boy Color one and messed with it and ripped the back off and tried to backlight it. I don't remember the type of the LCD, but it is one that is specifically developed to only work reflectively. It works really well reflectively. It's a great reflective display, but you just can't backlight it. I have a dream. I have millions of dollars. I want to get nice full 160 by 144 OLED panels made for the form factor and make a drop-in replacement. But I'm never going to do that. But that would be really cool.
I mentioned that to a friend of mine who still he spends half his time in California, the other half in Taiwan, and I kind of said, would they even do this? What's the quantities? And he said if it's something that they'd ever made before and they had all the existing things still there, you could probably make it fairly cheap, but you'd have to buy 1,000 of them. And I don't know that I could sell 1,000 backlit Game Boy Color screens, nor would I want to take the risk and investment because it's just me. It's not a company or anything. So
I think in totality, you might get 1,000 sold everywhere. For one person to make that investment, that's tough. Because contract a new LCD, it's extra expensive. Not an LCD, really just they need a modern display. There's new tooling to be done for all the parts of the entire assembly line. Never mind testing and any amount of QA if you're going to even do that. If you don't have QA, you have to at least pay someone to put a fake QA sticker on it. You're pushing it. So,
and we're still talking. It's going to be much more expensive than finding an AGS 101 with the backlit screen already in it. So, I think it'd be cheaper just to take one of those and mod it into a Game Boy Color. It's casing itself.
I already did that with the original Game Boy casing.
I saw that. I saw the pictures online. Yeah, that was cool.
It was fun. I'm never going to do it again. It was such a pain in the ass.
It's why I didn't do it.
Yeah, the Game Boy in the area is not common ground, and it needs to be. So that was a lot of fun. Actually, each Bent will now sell a kit that is just the Game Boy button area, so it's easy to solder to. That's kind of cool for projects if you're doing that. But
have you ever tried messing with any of the video out stuff for the Game Boys?
Not much. I've thought of a few techniques to do it. Actually, my roommate at school a couple years ago, he got into FPGAs and Game Boy stuff around the same time. So he did make a thing that would buffer it to the screen. The problem is that even though the display is 60 hertz on there, the horizontal refresh rate is really low. So to do it, you either have to have a kind of weird length line buffer and do a kind of line doubling technique. That's the low latency way, and that's only going to output properly to a CRT or a tolerant VGA display because DVI, HDMI, all the friends are pretty strict as to what they want. That's more asking the computer to conform to the display, not vice versa. Or you could capture to a frame buffer. Then you have to deal with things like potential lag or tearing, or that's kind of the trade-off there. Or triple buffering. So all those things I think are non-ideal. So I haven't really bothered. I think the best way is just to get a Super Game Boy 2, and then you can because the Super NES output is it's half of 480p, so it's very easy to line double in comparison.
Yeah, I've done a lot of testing with this just because I was always so curious. And while I love the Super Game Boy 2, the aspect ratio is still a little off.
It's a little funny.
And you can correct it if you're using a frame by.
Or you could just take your CRT and adjust the scanning or make it scan taller.
Yeah, true.
Some PC monitors, if you have an XRGB 2 or 3 in the doubling mode, you could just stretch the dimensions of the display until it fills the display, and then you have some nice big scan lines if you're into that.
Yeah.
Boy, it's a little odd, but whatever.
Have you tried
Uh,
the Game Boy interface software for the GameCube?
I haven't. I've seen what it can do, and it sounds like it has all the trade-offs I just described.
Yeah.
You can have some tearing, or you can have a little bit of lag. Or, I don't know. That's cool. I like that it has 240p mode. I definitely better than the stock Game Boy Player software, but I'm not a huge fan of the GameCube pad, and I could get the Game Boy Advance interface thingy, but that's a lot of inertia.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
use Super Game Boy. I mean, Game Boy Color that's a nice feature, obviously, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
there's a couple of people working on actually taking, like, the goal is to find the original Game Boy Advance with, like, a busted screen, and then take the guts out and then make it a consoleized version. And there's two separate projects going on. I tried to introduce them. I
Oh,
can't remember how it went on, but Akari and Arcade TV, the German guys, were working on it, and a new guy whose name I forget, and I'm so sorry if he's listening, but an American kid who's doing it too. I think he's a college student as well. And they're all
that's
running into the same issues. So
well, this is funny because the same roommate who did the Game Boy one, he also did it for Game Boy Advance. I worked with him on that, and we had some hard drive fun, and we lost it. But no, he totally had Game Boy Advance running on his like PVM little monitor, and it had just up to one frame of latency because there was only two buffers. But
mhm.
I don't know. It's not conceptually that different. It's the same challenge as the Game Boy.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it has just a higher dot clock, but it's the same horizontal scanning frequency.
Mhm.
In fact, the Nintendo DS and DS Lite, I guess DSi also, their scanning rate is compatible with NTSC. So I haven't thought about this, but I'm pretty sure if you just throw a jack on there, because it's parallel RGB going to the screen, pretty sure you could get it to output RGB through PVM without a lot of actual work.
Huh.
Or lined up.
That would be really
I haven't
cool.
looked at it. I'm going on things I was told,
Mhm.
so I don't know. It could be wrong.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That way, because I would love to be able to, because I think it's a very comfortable device to hold. So I'd love to be able to have it into my TV and use that as the controller itself.
It'd be very easy to interface with a Super NES controller too.
Oh yeah.
The console has it. Yeah, because if you just take like a DS, maybe like the touch screen's broken,
Mhm.
it's easy to trick it into turning on anyway.
Mhm.
So then you've got a decent Game Boy Advance thing. You'd have a border, but that's better than nothing maybe. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a cool thing to maybe play with sometime. Get a broken DS or something.
Hmm.
But I guess all this kind of brings into light the real thing with any video conversion. The only thing that actually matters ultimately is the scanning rate. To an extent, the dot clock too. But everything else, like color spaces can be converted, lines can be doubled. But if you have 240p, which is any resolution by roughly 252 lines of and I mean lines in the time domain where each line takes a certain amount of time to scan.
Mm-hmm.
Everything really is just a description of timing. But then from there, you can line double that. Resolutions for that are captured to a buffer, and since those are in lockstep with 480p, every one line becomes two, and that doesn't have to have any lag. It gets really hairy for other things. Actually, 720p is nice for line tripling in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great because it's a standard, standard resolution. But think about the 24 kilohertz Midway or Atari games, or
Yes.
I guess the X68K probably has it really rough. Because it has all these different scan rates. And those ones, the practical solution is to use a buffer or scale to some oddball 50 kilohertz resolution. Only weird stuff there. So I guess the thing that makes my FPGA project for Neo Geo, the reason that was pretty easy is because it's NTSC timing, the Neo Geo, for the most part. And a little asterisk there, it's not quite, things are a little off, 59 hertz instead of 60. But really, in the ballpark, that's what it is, and that means going to VGA is really easy.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I remember that popping up on your website, about a year and a half ago or something?
Yeah, a little while ago, I started the project from the development sense with a FPGA dev kit. Actually, since then, I've I made a PCB for it, and finally I've got these kits together going out to people on NeoGeo.com. It's taken a long time because they have to be built.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing them by hand, and then after doing 6 of them, I thought I'm really tired of this. So there's a really cool company called Macrofab in Texas that is very reasonable low volume manufacturer from PCBs to also in parts for your bill of materials together, doing the ordering and installation. So for a very reasonable price, here, I'll open one just now. I just got this in the mail. This is the first time it's come out of the package. This is one of many. I just did an order of about 12. I'll look at that stuck in there. Not easy to open. Well, these are all from Macrofab, and Little guy turned out pretty well. I wish I could. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you got a Cyclone 2 on there.
Wow, that looks great.
Voltage buffers. There are a lot of projects, that seem to be smaller run, but they don't translate from 5 volt to 2.3 volt and back. It's not great for either side in the long run. Got our DAC up here for VGA or component video. Not both at the same time, but you can do both at both 240p and 480p with optional scan lines and optional sync on green, optional everything I could think of. The reason it doesn't have any external memory because there's no buffer, well, there's a line buffer, but the main thing is that this is possible to do with not a lot of parts because the timings of the system it supports are half of the target 480p resolution. So there's no latency. It's technically one line of latency,
which it's not detectable.
There's 1/252nd of a frame of latency if you want to be real picky.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
So that's the same as the XRGB2. It's the same algorithm as the XRGB2. The biggest difference, and what makes it cheaper and easier to engineer, is that the XRGB2 has to do analog to digital conversion. First off, very fast. That's already expensive to do it at that speed. But then more so, it doesn't have any idea of the dot clock of the system, so it has to make an assumption and just sample a lot really fast. Now on the XRGB3, which I have one over here, you can adjust the sampling rate, the dot clock. And if you get that as some multiple of the original, it looks real sharp. If you get it a little bit off or out of phase, you're capturing on the transition from one pixel to another, and that kind of gives unpredictable results, and sometimes actually really weird artifacts. So really expensive things like nice scalers or really every VGA LCD monitor, there's a lot of crazy magic that goes into making VGA look any good on those, and that's doing the clock recovery, trying to align a possible sampling rate that goes with every transition. If you ever hit auto adjust, you'll see it kind of scale a little bit and try things, move the phase, and those ripples come from it trying to find out, okay, which dot clock is going to give the least moire effect with the sampling. Because if you think of the progression of one line as some periodic signal, with the dot clock being the frequency of it, and the sampling rate, if those two are aligned, you can capture every pixel okay. If they're a little bit off, then you're going to have some pixels that get missed or some that get stretched and doubled. I'm sure we've all seen on scalers at pixels from the scaling ratio not being an integer multiple.
Right.
So, that's fine for square systems. What do you do for CPS2 or 1 with the tall pixels? Or really narrow pixels is what they are. That's really hard to solve. So the only way to do that is either capture at exactly 384 pixels per visible area, which I think is 512 counting the porches, and sync. Do you have a 768 pixel wide display? Probably not. So other than turning your XGA monitor on its side, those are not real solutions. So
right.
that's one of the more challenging ones. This board actually does do CPS2 and 1 also, with different firmware on it. It's not going to look good on most LCDs. Some are really good about it, and if they can't find a dot clock, they'll just assume a really high one and try their hardest. Some TVs with 480p component are really funny too. Some of them try to do recovery, and some of them just try to sample as high as possible. And the sampling high as possible is actually really great for some reasons. In some situations, because system like the N64 output fuzzy pixels by default. That really throws those dot recovery or the clock recovery systems for a loop because they have nothing to work with. They don't have those hard edges. It's really hard for them to determine, okay, this is a pixel. This is what we're trying to align to. So we can talk about a little bit later the idea of sharpening the video output, but doing that actually helps those systems align to the clock a lot easier too. So the image is sharper. It's sharper by means of a better sampling rate and alignment, as well as just not being blurred and shitty. As the developers intended it, but it looks awful, in my opinion. But,
so you're selling those boards now right off your site, or just directly off the forums, or
on the forums?
You'll have to send me a link to them because I'll put them. I'll link to them on my Neo.
Sure. Yeah. I guess until I'm back at school, I'm really busy and it's hard to deal with a lot of these at a time. So my last order was 12, and I'm probably not going to put another one until I get back to Rochester, New York.
Gotcha.
And then after that, I graduate and do what I want with my time. But until then, kind of a little bit busy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
have you talked to Marcus at all about that assembly shop? Maybe that's an option for him in the open source scan converter.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I guess now that I think about it, the thing, it's being distributed as a kit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think he's going to try to. I don't think he's doing the pre-assembled ones. I think when he's doing the worldwide distribution, it's only going to be kits. But I could be wrong about that. But the last time I talked, that was the
okay.
plan. So yeah, maybe
Yeah,
that'll help.
that'd be great. Right now, I get these in. They've got this little programming port
Hmm.
on the top. I have my programmer, which is one of these USB blaster clones, very easy to find on eBay.
Yeah, those are the cheap ones.
Yeah, actually, so I made a bit of a programming rig. I have this Pogo pins adapter. Everyone
Ah,
hasn't seen these. These are pretty cool. You got the board, and the pins just kind of they just go on there, and they're stringy. And now I can program it and take it off in the program.
that's
So it's
awesome.
much easier to get these out. This is actually the ghetto blaster because I modded it to deliver power, so I don't have to get like the best harness or anything. So it's a lot easier to distribute these things. And I just set this up so I can get this order out a lot faster. Um, yeah, I do wish the kit here was a little more neatly put together. The challenge here is that there are so many Neo Geos that I can't make it fit well in the Neo Geo because there are so many. Like Temptress's a high def NES kit that is like perfectly made to fit in the NES, and it looks great, and it's always going to be really neat. There are only a few different Nintendo variants, so I think it's a little easier to plan for. Or the Marshall's N64 kit, the HDMI one. That one is
Yeah,
that
that
one is
perfect
really
drop-in.
it's
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, that's a really well put together kit, especially with the flex cable there. Um, so that's kind of like that's on the end of the ideal mod kit, right? I guess this is a little more of a DIY thing. Actually, a few members have sent me their Neo Geos. I'm not doing installs. I don't have time for that for the most part. But this is an NV1B, and I've never had one of these before. So every time I want to say I can support a system, I have to test it. I have to make a diagram for where you even wire it. So this is great because now I can figure out reverse engineer the DAC on this thing basically.
Hmm.
All in NV1C here. This is probably the most popular one because it looks like a console kind of. So. Luckily, all those, I'm pretty sure there are only 3 actual chipset variants that matter.
Hmm.
They're all a derivative of that. Really, actually, 2. There's the Neo GRZ chipset versus the original video one. They have different timings a little bit for the video. So,
Hmm.
apart from that, there's one little solder pad and it's good to go. So, it's pretty easy to deal with.
Yeah, that thing's awesome. I remember reading about it, but I didn't know that it had actually gone to sale yet. So yeah, definitely send me a link.
Yeah, I guess I'd still call it like in very early release is like the first version. And they all work great for me. Fingers crossed people are able to install and get it working for themselves. Every monitor I've tried, it has worked on. I'm sure there are some weirdo ones that won't like 59 point whatever.
Right.
Again,
Yeah. That's a common thing with the Neo Geo home systems as well, and I remember Marcus talking a lot about that in the forums when the open source scan converter was first being tested, and how everybody was excited that it did still work with the Neo Geo. So
everyone says that, and I don't know. Like, is there just like a lot of stuff going around about sync that is maybe a little bit made up? And I say that because I have an XRGB3, I had an XPC4, which is great for X68K, but also consoles, and an XRGB2.
hmm.
I had no trouble with any Neo Geo on any of these ever. And I see some funny words like clean sync, raw sync, pure sync, powered sync.
Yeah, I understand why people, especially why the cable sellers would choose words like that just to make things, just
Sure.
to try to simplify the sale. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. But it's done more harm than good in the long run.
Yeah,
So,
like I guess maybe those are terms that have been come up with for people who maybe there's you just have like let's say this someone he just wants to play Nintendo and wants to really enjoy it, doesn't know anything about like technology stuff, and I think that's a really uphill situation to get into because in order to do these setups like there's a lot that goes into them in planning, getting switches, getting scan converters if you need that sort of thing, sync strippers, sync on green combiners, there's all this stuff, and it's all made for the pro video market, so it's
mhm.
not made to be user friendly, it's meant to be useful.
Right, those Extron
It's
203
self-compatible
boxes
too.
that I love, if you ever take them apart, there's dip switches on the inside too that
Yep.
if you've bought a used one, well, they're all used now, and it doesn't work right, how come 20 people I know have bought them and they're all perfect and this one isn't? Well, that's because somebody was messing with the dip switches on the inside too, so it's complicated.
Yeah, I have a few Extron boxes. There's a really great VGA switch actually that auto switches, but it's does a good job and doesn't digitize it, which is great because I got a Super Emotion thinking it'd be kind of fun to be able to do some 240p content to my various monitors, and I don't know. I think it's kind of a piece of shit. That's the problem with it.
Really?
Yeah. It's okay maybe for like a Genesis game with 3-bit color, but we tried to use it just to enjoy like watching a movie because we have a 36-inch 480 ITV, and we're like, well, it would be nice to be able to hook up the computer to it, so we did. And I've tried like 3 different units, and they all have exactly the same problem. It seemed like the sampling depth of the color channels, red in particular, is just really low, and it would just get really dithery at low. Not dithery. It doesn't have dither patterns. It's not good enough to have dither patterns. It'll just kind of flicker between colors. Like it doesn't have like it looks like it was like 4 or 5-bit depth, and just for like gradients and things like that, like in movies especially. Just I don't know. It looked a little awful. So, and the horizontal sampling rate was kind of low. It doesn't do clock recovery. It just tries. So, it's definitely not made for watching movies. It's made for presentations, and I'm sure for those it's great.
Right.
And
Yeah.
There's some games it was good too, but I guess I left a little bit disappointed. I think the only 240p option I know from a computer that's really good is probably the arcade VGA cards. I'm sure there are a lot of really cool converters like the Super Motion I just don't know about. There's so many out there.
Yeah, Funna has a bunch listed on his, the Genius Box, and my buddy Phil's tested a bunch of those. I'm pretty sure it's on the site. I can't remember what page it was on, but I did, using the 240p test suite, a comparison of just direct 240p and 480p downres to 240p through the Super Emotion, and there was a noticeable difference. And I think I even have a quote from Funna explaining exactly what that was. But I mean, yeah, I agree totally. But it's a cool device, but there's I don't know. I would if at least you're using a PC into an RGB monitor, always recommend a direct video card if you could. But there's one guy going around. I forgot. I think it's the guy who does the Big Blue menu. I never got a chance to talk to him, but he's very strongly against the arcade VGA. He feels that using CRT EMU driver and a newer ATI card combined is a better overall option. But I don't know, man. I know people that aren't very good with this stuff, and they just installed the arcade VGA, loaded the driver, and it worked perfect. There was nothing to mess with. That's it, no hassle. So.
Yeah, there are good software solutions. I'm all for that. I've never made soft 15 kilohertz work, like back when that was a thing in the mid 2000s. Never seen it work. I'm sure it does on phone cards, but
it does on only very specific ATI cards. Are the only ones I've got working with.
Yeah, so someday it'd be cool to get that working. But actually, my old ThinkPad, I had a ThinkPad P43, 10PMN. For whatever reason, under Linux only, the S video would do 240p. No explanation. There's no acknowledgement from the computer. I just thought that was weird, kind of cool, and weird.
And that was with the Intel integrated video?
Yep. And that's actually what we ended up using to solve our video watching problem that day. We ended up watching The Simpsons in 240p. Not as bad as you think.
That's hysterical.
A little bad, but not that bad. I don't know what locked it into outputting only one field, but I thought it was cool.
Yeah, that's neat. I've literally, I spent hours trying, but I've never been able to force any of the Intel integrated graphics into anything like that.
I had never seen it before. A computer natively outputting 240p that, was from the 2000s. I didn't think it existed, but apparently the capability's in there. So
that's pretty.
That'd be a cool driver hack for them to do. There wasn't much control over it.
So you mentioned before the N64 blur thing. You were working on that as well, right?
Yep. So actually, these boards, if I just don't install these bus transceivers, the N64 is already 3.3 volts, so these became great testbed boards for N64 screwing around. Mm-hmm. So I have an old type one of these just in my N64 because I wanted to give myself the RGB output. It was late revision. And then I have 480p line doubler code for N64. I'm probably never going to release that because it's not as good as Marshall's. And the 480i support is flaky, and I don't want to release something like that. Mm-hmm. Nor do I want to have to deal with people complaining about something like that. So it's mostly just for playing Super Smash Brothers. But then I did the sharpening stuff because when I was developing it, I had read like, oh yeah, N64 has fuzzy output, and I believe it. And I'd done RGB out of it before and seen that. But it actually made the development harder than it should have been because I'd look at it and it would look kind of shitty on the monitor. And I didn't know if it was my fault, if I was accidentally causing the stack to blur pixels by either maybe it wasn't rated for that frequency.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The weird thing about the N64 is that it always outputs 640 pixels per line, no matter what circumstance. Mm-hmm. Even if it's running in 320 by 240, the frame buffer may be that size, but the output is still 640 pixels. If the game has requested some oddball resolution, like 256 by whatever, it's still outputting 640 pixels. Every game I've tested, and we've gone through a lot of them with the 64 drive, they all output that resolution externally. The dot clock is a constant, well, not the dot clock, the proprietary weird communication clock is 50 megahertz. That's what drives the video output chip. I guess the output dot clock is always 12.5 megahertz, and that never, ever changes. So, it seems like the blurring feature in 320 by 240 mode is an option. One of the registers, I guess it's called VI blur in a lot of situations, but I don't know much about N64 software development, so I don't know more than that. But it is something that could be enabled or disabled by a developer. And what it seems to do is just for every second pixel of the 640 pixel output will be blurred 50% with the previous. So it's basically take an image in an image editor, paste it over itself in a new layer, move it over 1 pixel, and the opacity to 50%, and you can recreate the effect that it has.
That's a great way to describe it. And that's what Marshall's board, that's the deblur option on his board. That's what that's doing, is shifting it back, correct?
His has a really good heuristic that determines is this even the case. And you can also determine, which columns are being blurred, even or odd. Because if you think about it, if you've taken something where every pixel is twice as wide, and you have one of them, the off by 150% one, well, then every other column is unmodified and unmarred. So my simple fix is to just basically sample only the good columns, and then instead of sampling the column that's blurred, I just repeat the previous pixel for every 2 pixels. So the problem here is that, if you've ever played Super Smash Bros. And gone to screen adjust, you can actually move the image around horizontally to adjust for your display. And that moves it at that, I guess, sub-pixel precision, you could call it, thinking in terms of the frame buffer. So that makes my deblur, instead of sampling every good pixel, it samples only every bad pixel. Yeah. So, if you were to do this manually, you'd have a switch for enabling deblur, but then also determining which column you want to drop. Marshall's thing is great. It has a heuristic, and it can figure this out on its own and disable when not needed. That said, if you have a game that isn't using the filter, but it's a 320 by 240 game, well, doing the deblur isn't going to make it any worse. You're not dropping any information. You're only dropping repeat information. So there's no harm. And on my N64, I have a set of dip switches on the back for this sort of thing, but I've never turned it off because there's no reason to. For 480i games, I don't know of any 480i games that aren't 640 pixels wide, so I just turn it off for any 480i context. So my N64 has that built into it, and it's all right. But anyone who really wants it, they should probably get a Marshall's kit. If you really wanted RGB out of Marshall's kit for 480p, if you were to put it at the 480p output option over HDMI and tell it to do direct display, and then take the HDMI and get it out to VGA, there are lagless converters for this job. Because they're really only acting as a DAC, because the timings of HDMI are still the same as VGA. That should give you a lagless 480p output if you really want that. Really, I've seen the most use out of the 480p component for my board, both for Neo Geo and N64, because a lot of new TVs still have 480p component support. They may not have 240p that's very good, or 480i kind of sucks.
It drives me nuts when the TVs interpret 240p signals as 480i interlace. Drives me crazy.
Really nasty. And they do this kind of smoothing stuff too. Things move and they look a little different than the things that are holding still. That's I guess also a result of that line blending. So
the code that's going around for Tim's board, I think Bordy posted it. Weren't you working on that as well too?
We worked on this in total isolation, but I think we came up with the same solution. And that's great. He's made his available. I think his is only doing the RGB version, the blur fix. Whereas mine, I really tacked this feature onto my line doubler, the 480p. So that's why I'm not releasing mine. I did compile it for Tim's board, but I never actually flashed it because I never bothered because I don't have Tim's board. That was the plan. But I've emailed him a little bit, and I described my fix to him. So with any luck, that'll be an actual feature that comes in with it. That'd be nice. As he's put the pads on the board for switches, so that's cool.
Yeah, My Life in Gaming did a bunch of. I'm not sure if you saw the video, but when they did the mixing of using Marshall's HDMI board, turning the sharp pixel mode on, and then also mixing the Game Shark codes to do the software anti-aliasing, I thought in some games it was phenomenal. I mean, yeah, it looks a little jagged on a flat screen, but if there was a solution for that for RGB monitors, I think it would be pretty close to like a better looking SNES, I guess is the best way to put it.
So yeah, the game short codes are interesting. Turning off the anti-aliasing in those games, that's a really cool experiment, and it actually can help performance for some of them. Although the main detriment to performance is the fill rate of the N64, so big polygons are still your main enemy. The thing that's kind of annoying when we talked about the deblurring is that for a little while, a lot of people were talking about them like they were the same thing, and that the effect on the image was the same. Well, they're actually wildly different. Because if you have the anti-aliasing turned off, well, it's still smearing the image. So you have blurry jaggies, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yeah, it totally does, yeah.
So I got a Game Shark to try and play with the code, and it didn't work as a piece of junk, so I threw it out. But sometime I'd like to get a different Game Shark that works and play with it, because that'd be kind of cool to play with. And maybe for Super Smash Brothers, for 4-player, it's kind of hairy with performance, mostly because of graphics. There's a little bit of CPU slowdown, but there's also a lot of graphical slowdown that has nothing to do with overclocking. You can't just fix it that way. So if that helps, that'd be cool too.
Yeah, have you ever overclocked an N64 just to see what the performance was like?
Yeah, most games aren't CPU bottlenecked. They're mostly graphics bottlenecked, and that doesn't help the overclocking. Super Smash Brothers, Teams game, do get a little bit better because there is a little bit of CPU slowdown too. I think the collision detection causes a lot of time being spent. Because if you have friendly fire on, it's actually a lot slower, which that's what makes me think that. But there's also a lot of graphics bottlenecking, which is why the Donkey Kong stage can't run full speed with 2 players even. I don't know exactly why. I'm not a 3D graphics guy, but it's noticeably different. So anything that can help those, that'd be cool. I like Smash 64 a lot, so having that be a nice playable thing, also with a lot of people. Well, actually, not a lot of people, with good teams of people. I don't like playing with 4 players usually. That'd be nice to have. So I'll play with that sometime. But things like the EverDrive or 64 drive are kind of expensive, and I only want a 1-64 game, so I can't justify it exactly.
Yeah, I own them all because I just, I especially love it for testing, but I just want the option to have it. But I mean, for the most part, I mean, I try to play a lot of the SNES and Genesis games, but I mean, the Game Boy Advance games, I own the only 10 Game Boy Advance games I'll ever play. But I still bought the EverDrive Game Boy Advance just because. So it's,
Yeah, I see those as that's a great way to try things. I've got a number of those systems, the cartridge emulators, I guess you could call them, RAM carts, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially during this time of my life, I'm moving about a lot. But
try moving your collection everywhere you go, rather just bring one apart.
I've kept a good number of collection things. I'm never letting go of my Gimmick cartridge, but right now it's kind of hard. Unfortunately, those are only getting more expensive, so that's actually rough. Yeah. And I hope someone makes one for the Neo Geo that's any good. Those multi-carts, don't get me started on those multi-carts. They're awful.
I've never seen one that I liked.
So,
especially the Neo Geo ones. There was 161 to 1 multi-cart.
Yeah.
But there was not 161 games. Not even, and most of them didn't work right. There were issues.
Yeah. So I got that cart once to try it. Number one, off the bat, it's all 3.3 volt stuff in there. DBElectronics has a great post on Sprite's Mind about why this is bad for both the system and the cartridge. Mm-hmm. I don't care about the cartridge. The cartridge can go die for all I care, but the system, I don't want to damage the Neo Geo Extras A6 that can't be replaced.
Right.
Especially not an expensive system like that, or really any of them. But there's also a lot more power consumption, and that's bad. So if I find that link, I'll give it to you, and you can include it.
Yeah, that'd be neat. I'd love to post that.
It's a good read. But number one, it doesn't have anything to really deal with that. It either overvolts the chips or runs them at 3.3 volts and has the I/O lines at too high of a voltage. And it does both. There are different variants of the cart configured differently. Mm-hmm. There aren't even like resistors in line. That would be a huge upgrade. Number two, there's so many hacks on there. But also, the 2 games I wanted most that are really expensive and out of reach are Windjammers and Money Puzzle Exchanger. Well, it doesn't have Windjammers, and Money Puzzle Exchanger was bugged the music didn't play during the game, and that's not fun at all. The sound driver.
My cousin Scott's quest for cheap Windjammers has been going on for years now. He loves that game, and they're not in any of the multi-carts or anything. So
yeah, the cheapest way to play Windjammers is to get a Neo Geo CD and play that version.
He bought a Neo Geo CD, which takes CDR games just for Windjammers, just for that.
That's the most reasonable thing to do, which is unfortunate. I have a broken Metal Slug 2 cartridge I got for like $10. Metal Slug 2 is great. It has the Prog PK1 boards, which is can address a lot of round space without any protection. So maybe one of these days I'll play with making a giant RAM cart, and that's a lot of buses to deal with. There are a lot of different rounds you have to pretend are on a cart. And see
Darksoft is coming out with it probably this fall. Actually, did you see that project at all?
Yeah, I did read about that, and that's what demotivated me to not really work on it, because I don't want to compete. I don't have time for that. But
yeah, I mean, somebody's already spent all that time. It's like, why would you start from scratch on your own project? So what else do you got going on? I mean, obviously you got to finish school and everything. That's probably overwhelming and time consuming. But any other projects you're working on, or anything else that you're doing next, or just kind of working on that board that you were showing us and waiting for school?
Well, actually, the fun part is right now, where I'm working as an intern, I have to not be working on anything right now. So I'm actually thinking very hard about what I'm going to work on, just right now. What I was working on before, and will be working on when I'm done, let's see, in terms of hardware projects, mostly just the Neo VGA board, as we talked about. I am also working on 2 games right now. One is for NES, and that is for the NES Dev competition that it ends in December. Well, it really ends on the New Year's. And I've been working more long-term on the Sega Genesis port of Live Link Sector. It's an old PC game from 2004, I think, 2005. And it's, I don't know, I played it when I was in middle school as a kid a lot. So, I liked it, and it seemed like a really good match for the platform. So those systems really, that's where I learned a lot of like embedded system stuff from, really. So, that's kind of has gotten me into how I'm doing now and what I probably want to do later. So it's been a good playground just for, trying things with regards to programming in these small environments. I'd like to get both of those things done, because why would you not want to release a new game for a 80s console?
Right, yeah. Hell yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Definitely keep me posted on all that stuff. As soon as any of these things get released, let me know, and I'll put it up on the news thing. So. And
for a while, I was working on a Genesis port of a PC game that I finished and have on Steam, and the irony would have been that it sounds like the Genesis version may have been easier to market and sell. Because it turns out there are a lot of games on Steam with old-style game graphics, for better or worse.
Yeah, I've only played 1 or 2, and I was happy with the ones I played, but I feel like a lot of times people are just capitalizing on the fact that there's a huge market out there for people that like 2D side-scrollers. So, hey, let's just draw basic art and do it, and so.
Yeah, that's kind of like, that's almost like a misappropriation, where like, that's very much a cash grab. If you've drawn something low resolution, well, it's easy to just say, oh, it's retro, and then catch in on that. But I don't know. I think that's a little bit toxic. It's just, there are definitely a lot of good games out there that have been done in this old style, but they have selling points beyond that. Mm-hmm. And it kind of devalues what might really be there, I think, to do that. And I guess it's kind of like, like when an artist might imitate the style of like a different type of music they're not used to. Mm-hmm. If they do it like a chintzy job, and it doesn't, they're only very superficially emulating the style, it's kind of nauseating, right? Like, you hear like imitations of another culture's music. That's some of the ones that are really, honestly, offensive all the time, but also just like kind of hard to listen to, almost embarrassing. I think there's a lot of that with that kind of style copying too. Like, to not get what makes a NES game interesting as from a stylistic and artistic perspective, I think that's kind of doing a disservice. Mm-hmm. And to say like, oh, well, it's nostalgia, that's why you like it, it's kind of implying that the game wasn't actually good, and the only reason you're going to play it is for that.
Right.
Nostalgia. I didn't have a NES growing up. It has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. I made my game trying to look more like kind of a mix of like MSX and Virtual Boy style. Everyone hates the Virtual Boy. I think it looks really neat.
I like the Virtual Boy. I just hate that there aren't that many good games for it.
It's a horrible VR set. I'll give it that. But the screen is really, really sharp. I think it has great contrast, and I don't know, a lot of games have really interesting style to work with it being so dark. Like
I loved the Wario game. I thought that was
yeah,
great.
Mario Land looks great. And there are a lot of interesting decisions there that are harder to make in other contexts, which is kind of like the Game Boy games are really weird artistically in that way. Game Boy is really something that really came into fruition during the Super Nintendo time. The Super Nintendo, you have a lot of like shading, a lot of colors. Whereas the Game Boy, in terms of hardware, it's a little closer to NES in terms of what you can expect from it. Not a lot of sprites and only 4 tones.
Mm-hmm.
But the artists of the time are definitely more used to the higher, amounts of shading you could do. And on the NES, you just can't do that. You don't have that many colors, and you're not going to waste them all on like a monochrome shading scale. You want to have more colors to work with flat shading. Well, the Game Boy is interesting because with similar hardware, without the colors to worry about, they're doing all this like interesting and detailed stuff with great shading and character designs that are actually pretty detailed. You couldn't do on the NES like reasonably.
Yeah, a perfect example of that is if you look at Super Mario Land 1 and then Super Mario Land 2 on the original Game Boy.
Mario Land 2 is very, very early NES style, and Mario Land 2 looks like Super Mario World, a lot closer. Yeah. And I guess like that kind of constraint, you get the same thing on the Virtual Boy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It has these really bright, poppy, contrasting colors. A lot of MSX games, I think, have this too, like the Gradius games and Proteus. There's a lot of interesting details in there, like in what should be like the worst circumstances for graphics. So I think that's a really neat thing to look at, and I guess you could easily look at it and just say, oh, well, it's low res, it's pixels, and you're done. But I don't know. There are a lot of tricks you have to do to make these constraints look intentional, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually, that kind of goes back to the N64 low res stuff. If you look at a game like Yoshi's Island, I think everyone can agree that's a great looking game.
Mm-hmm.
The art, like everything, all the art is very, very intentional. There's a style they were going for. They knew the limitations, and they made it look really good with what they had. To the point where, say, high resolution would make it look better is hard because pixel details were done intentionally.
Right.
Like a lot of it evokes like a watercolor effect,
mm-hmm.
but a lot of it also doesn't. Like Yoshi's sprites aren't watercolor; they're pixel art. A lot of N64 games are 3D. 3D is a little more abstract. You're not saying I want this pixel to be this. You're telling you're more saying like this is my character. I've designed him this way, and you're asking the graphics processor to render it in certain circumstances. So how it does that and which pixels go where are more of a side effect to your design rather than facing things individually. So that's one case where I can't argue that low res makes N64 games really look better. It might hide the lack of detail in certain situations, but like that's one thing where I think the pixel details don't bring out exactly as much a much artistic intent, if that makes sense. Compared to earlier games where to obfuscate the pixel details is like taking away it's like the only thing they had.
Mm-hmm.
So taking it away is kind of also not great for it. I think those constraints are what make the style interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, maintain that's really important.
Yeah, it's something I noticed too when going over like some of the Saturn 2D games, and just because there weren't that many of them, but just when you got the higher detail, like I remember as a kid thinking, when NES turned into SNES, I just thought this is perfect. Like this is, I no longer need to use my imagination and pretend that the old man in Zelda is the old man. Now it looks like an old man. But I thought, I can't wait to see what comes next. Am I going to be that much more blown away? And it's different. It's just different, not better. So I think once you hit around the 16-bit style of graphics, it's, you have everything you need where, your imagination lets you get into the game, not having to worry about what character looks like what or what background looks like it's supposed to. So.
Oh, and there's a really uncomfortable era in 64 where they weren't sure how abstract their characters should be. On the NES and Super NES, you have an RPG and you have this like twitchy 2-frame sprite of their arms moving, and you're like, okay, I can figure this out. They're walking. It looks a lot like walking, but as a rational adult, I can figure out this abstraction for walking. That's okay. Exactly. And you don't look at it and think, well, this animation's terrible. The animation isn't trying to specifically show this is how your joints move.
Right, exactly.
It's okay. Right. It's okay. And you have enemies that they might just like the Goombas, like they're mindless. They're just staring straight forward, moving side to side. That's okay. I don't think that the designer wants me to think this is the exact object in real life. It's very abstract, and that's fine. During the N64 era, and some of the Super NES also, like a lot more details, a lot more frames of animation. Some of the enemy behaviors weren't updated with this lesser abstraction. We've gotten more specific with how the characters are supposed to act. So have them do mindless things like just walk side to side in a platform, it starts to look more ridiculous, because if you've drawn this villain, he's got a complex face and a facial expression, he's carrying tools and whatever, what's he doing? Why is he walking back and forth? He can do anything else with that time. That question, I think, becomes a lot more strong, and I think this is taken to the logical extreme. I was shown the game Braid. I hadn't played it for a long time, but so much detail on the character's face, great-looking backgrounds, and what the hell are the enemies doing? I asked the same question, because they're so detailed.
Yeah.
They're drawn with a personality, but they don't look mindless. They're acting mindless. I think that's kind of weird. Whereas, like, in a lot of like the bigger open-world RPGs, characters get, like, NPCs are given a lot of purpose. Or, like, look at Shenmue, right? Every character has a little purpose there, and they're very detailed to match that. And I think that goes together really well. Whereas, when you can go to go up to someone in like a 3D RPG and you can talk to them and they'll say the same line twice, that's way more jarring than when in Pokemon you walk up, like for Game Boy, they'd say the same line twice. You kind of, I guess, I don't want to say it's just that you're more accepting of something that's worse. I think it's just that again, like, it's very different.
Yeah.
And not necessarily a matter of it just being squarely better, but the style they're going for in terms of storytelling is also really different.
Now I'm really curious to see your game, because you have such a grasp on this. So.
Yeah, I guess I could send you a link on it. Despite everything I just said, I'm not depicting some crazy story or anything. Actually, the story is hardly more than an afterthought out of obligation.
Sometimes it doesn't.
That's kind of exactly what I want. Mario's story is absolutely an afterthought.
Right, totally. Doesn't matter. There's a princess, go save her, get to the end of the level. Who cares why she's there?
Now you got Mario with like the detailed like gene patterns on his overalls, and if you're gonna make him, you're gonna put these human-like details. We talked about the size of his head then, because it's kind of, that's another thing. This hasn't changed with the amount of realism you're putting into his environment. Now you're more implying, no, that's really how he's shaped. This is Mario, and you put him next to Peach, who is shaped a little more reasonably in terms of head size. And
Quite the noggin on that plumber.
Well, yeah, it's like he's got to be a smart guy. Look at him. That's another weird updated thing. They sure tried with Sonic. He's very equipped to play basketball these days, and his physique. But it's just that's a weird update to do. If you don't update, it seems half-assed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So the sprite designs, I think it's a lot more accepting, because they've accepted this abstract, or like the chibi style, I guess, is, or the super deformed. That's very far to the left of the sort of thing, and doesn't stand out.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and doing this, man. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, so this is perfect. I get to, I feel like, I hope everybody else is having as much fun as I did. I feel like I get to catch up with somebody that I knew but never knew, because I've been following your website but never talked to you before, so this is neat. I appreciate you coming on.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and please keep me updated on, just shoot me an email whenever you have any updates on any of your projects or any of your games, and I'll make sure to include it in the news and everything, and keep everybody else abreast of what's going on.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks again, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yep. See you later.